Going beyond the chatter. Marianne Williamson said, "In learning to show up more fully for one person, we learn to show up more fully for life." Mindful listening, listening with our hearts and not only our minds, listening for connection requires silence, reflection, and presence. I always thought I was a pretty good listener, paying attention to body language, reflecting back what I heard, not interrupting, staying focused on the speaker. But I need to make a confession. I'm a multitasker from way back. I usually pride myself on being able to do at least 4 things at once. I can talk on the phone, check my emails, listen to the radio, and make to-do lists all at the same time. And I always thought that I was giving each of these activities a good amount of my attention. But I'm beginning to worry that I've been kidding myself. I'm beginning to realize that lately I've only been focusing on hearing, and I've not really learned the skills to listen. I've been practicing listening mindlessly and not mindfully. Do I allow enough silence? Do we make room for the quiet? Do we practice listening as a spiritual discipline? Do we think carefully about the impacts of our words? Do we cut off deep discussion with our desire to speak and be heard? And this is where I've very often found myself caught. Only by defining ourselves and choosing to be the best we can be, and by not taking things personally, another bad habit of mine, and treating one another with respect, can we wait long enough with one another to hear each personal truth as it evolves. We must listen with kindness and support. We must set appropriate boundaries. We must allow people, including ourselves, the time it will take to become the precious people we all need to be, the precious people we are meant to be, the precious people the world needs us to be. Author Margaret Whiteley writes, "What would it be like to be listening to one another? Not mediation, negotiation, or debate, just simple listening. We need time to sit together, to listen together. I think it's important," this is again her quote, "I think it's important to begin a conversation by listening as best as you can for what's different, for what surprises you. We have many opportunities every day to be the one who listens, curious rather than certain. If you try this with several people, you might find yourself laughing in delight as you realize how many unique ways there are to be human. But the greatest benefit of all is that listening moves us closer. When we listen with as little judgment as possible, we develop better relationships with each other. And as the world grows more puzzling and difficult, most of us don't want to keep struggling through it alone. I can't know what to do from my own narrow perspective. I need a better understanding of what's going on. When we listen, we open doors between one another. We hear one another into speech, as Nell Morton puts it. We come alive to one another, and we come alive through one another. Even when a person is speaking in anger, or in pain, or some other large feeling, it is possible to listen with this open quality, to understand their anger, their feeling as belonging to them. To truly listen is to listen under the words for the meaning. Of course, we're equally responsible to speak with care, to choose our words not to hurt, but to simply express our own thoughts and feelings without blame or judgment, and that equally takes practice. Still, there's less that we can do with speech than we can with listening. The simplest example of this is when we meet in the presence of grief, those times when we can't think of the right words. Yet we know that when a loved one dies, there are no right words. No one can fix it with words, only the gift of compassionate listening. When the heart is broken, it cannot be fixed with words. Our listening presence is enough. For most of life, there is no fix, only learning new ways of being. And no one can tell us those new ways. We have to find our own way, listen our own way towards them, and practice until we find our way. And actually, we probably always will be finding our way. We need to find our way as a church community, as a nation, and as a world. We need to find our way beyond the habit responses that govern not only our individual acts, but our nations. Susan Skog, in Radical Acts of Love, tells this story, and I apologize if I can't pronounce the names correctly. When Nachshon Washman was captured by Palestinian terrorists, a botched rescue attempt ended in his murder. Nachshon's father, Yehuda, was still mourning the loss of his son when the father of the man who'd killed him called. His son's actions convinced him that enough blood had been shed. Washman agreed, and the two men arranged to meet. Now together they tell their story to groups again and again as part of the Compassionate Listening Project. What this story tells me is that in the midst of hatred, there's the hope of listening towards a new way. Just as this compassionate listening can bring tender healing, it also has a redeeming power in the world, even in the hardest of places. Not easy, but real. In The Lost Art of Listening, Michael Nichols writes, "Listening has not one but two purposes, taking in information and bearing witness to another's expression. By momentarily stepping out of his or her own frame of reference and into ours, the person who listens well acknowledges and affirms us. That affirmation, that validation is absolutely essential for sustaining the self-affirmation known as self-respect. Without being listened to, we are shut up in the solitude of our own hearts." We forget how to listen. It is difficult in our fast-paced world to sit quietly and hear the Spirit in all things around us. One challenge is that the average person speaks at a rate of 125 words a minute, yet we can process up to 500 words a minute. During that lag time, you can think about your to-do list or what you want for dinner, or you can slow down and listen deeply. This is my challenge. And when you listen deeply to others, you may find yourself without anything clever or moving to say when your turn comes around. And that's my lesson that I need to learn. But this lack of preparation is a blessing in disguise. It gives you access to a deeper reflection and a heartfelt response. By our own act of attentive witness, we can touch the creativity within each other and enable their expression. Deep, mindful listening connects us to each other. It reaches across space that divides and joins us together. We never outgrow our need to communicate, our need to reach out to others, to connect and to communicate what it feels like to live in our separate private worlds of experience. Mindful listening can bridge that chasm. The great reward of listening well is that it allows us to be open, generous, and connected, to touch each other's lives and enrich us in the process. Mindful listening also promotes growth in the listener, the one listened to, and the relationship between them. And finally, a thought about what to do first by Paul Tillich. The first duty of love is to listen.